Chapter 1. The Fatal Night. The rain battered the city like a whip of water and wind, creating a melancholic symphony that reverberated through the deserted streets. Neon lights flickered on the horizon, casting restless shadows on the facades of buildings. In Detective Jack Malone's office, the constant sound of rain and the soft glow of an old lamp provided the only company. Jack, a middle-aged man with a face marked by scars and bitter experiences, was reclined in his worn leather chair, contemplating a glass of cheap whiskey. His eyes, deep and tired, reflected the dim light of the lamp on a desk cluttered with files and documents. The creak of the office door interrupted his thoughts. A slender and elegant figure entered swiftly, drenched from the rain. Before Jack could say a word, the woman stumbled and collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Jack quickly stood up, spilling his whiskey as he dropped the glass. Kneeling beside her, Jack noticed her pale face and slightly trembling lips. He carefully lifted her and placed her on a sofa against the wall. The woman began to regain consciousness slowly, her blue eyes opening to meet Jack's. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse but gentle. I think so," she replied, her voice weak. "I need your help." "Let's take it easy," said Jack, offering her a glass of water. "What's your name?" "Evelyn Parker," she said, holding the glass with trembling hands. My husband is dead." Jack frowned, feeling the weight of her words. "What happened?" "The police say it was suicide, but I know it wasn't." "Jonathan would never do that," Evelyn said, her voice filled with pain and despair. "He had many enemies. I need you to find out the truth." Jack observed Evelyn closely. She was a woman of refined appearance, but her eyes revealed deep sadness. "Tell me more about Jonathan. Did he mention anyone or anything that might suggest danger?" "The night he died, he had a visitor. A man I'd never seen before," she said, her gaze lost in memories. "They argued. Jonathan was terrified. And this man, do you know who he was?" Jack asked, leaning forward. Evelyn shook her head. "No, but Jonathan mentioned something about the big deal. Something that could change everything." Jack felt there was something big and dark behind Jonathan's death. "I need access to Jonathan's office. Can you arrange that?" "Yes, anything you need," Evelyn replied, determination returning to her voice. That same night, Jack headed to Jonathan Parker's office. The building, a fortress of concrete and glass, exuded a sense of power and mystery. The room where Jonathan was found was cold and desolate, still filled with the smell of despair. Jack examined every corner with trained eyes. He noticed a half-full glass of whiskey on the table. Something about the scene didn't seem right. Almost imperceptible blood stains on the carpet and scratches on the wooden desk suggested a struggle. Jack began to piece together a disturbing puzzle. As he investigated, he heard soft footsteps. A young woman entered the room, her eyes red from crying. "Are you Jack Malone, the detective?" she asked, her voice broken by pain. "Yes, and you are?" "Emily, I'm Mr. Parker's secretary. I heard you're investigating his death. There's something you need to know," she said, her voice trembling. Jack gestured for her to continue, his eyes fixed on her. "The night he died, he had a visitor, a man I'd never seen before. They argued, and Jonathan seemed terrified," she said, her voice full of fear. Jack leaned forward, intrigued. "Do you know who this man was?" "No," Emily replied, her gaze lost in painful memories. "But I heard Jonathan mention something about the big deal, something that would change everything. He was involved in something dangerous, something that terrified him." Jack knew he had found his first solid lead. Jonathan Parker's case was far from a simple suicide. The city's shadows hid deadly secrets, and he was determined to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The first piece of the puzzle was in place, but the road ahead was full of dangers and uncertainties. Chapter 2. Traces of Blood and Lies. The city still slept under the blanket of rain when Jack Malone returned to Jonathan Parker's office the next day. The rising sun struggled to break through the thick clouds, casting a pale and cold light over the buildings. Jack knew that every minute counted, and he needed to act quickly before any evidence was eliminated. The building where Jonathan Parker worked was imposing, a tower of glass and steel standing out against the gray sky. Jack entered through the empty lobby, his boots echoing on the marble as he headed to the elevator. The silence of the place seemed almost unnatural, as if the building itself held the secrets of its late occupant. On Jonathan's floor, the office was as cold and desolate as the previous night. Jack began to inspect the room again, this time with even greater attention to detail. He crouched near the desk and examined the bloodstains on the carpet. Small, almost invisible, but present. The detective followed the trail of blood with his eyes, noting how it led away from the desk and stopped abruptly. Jack then turned to Jonathan's desk. He opened the drawers, searching for anything that might provide a clue. Among business papers and contracts, he found a leather journal. The pages were filled with notes about meetings, contacts, and, most importantly, frequent mentions of something called Project Phoenix. Jonathan seemed obsessed with this project, noting details of secret meetings and dangerous negotiations. As he read, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jack quickly stashed the journal and prepared for whatever was coming. The door opened, revealing William Thompson, a middle-aged man with a sharp smile and snake-like eyes. He wore an expensive suit and exuded an aura of power and danger. "Malone, isn't it?" William said, entering the room uninvited. "I heard you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "It's part of my job," Jack replied unfazed. "And you are?" "William Thompson." The man introduced himself, extending a hand that Jack ignored. "Jonathan's partner. I've come to pick up some documents for our lawyers." Jack looked at him, suspicious. "Interesting. Do you know anything about Project Phoenix?" William frowned for a moment but quickly regained his composure. "Ah, Jonathan's old dream. A grand idea but dangerous. Many people wouldn't want to see him succeed." Jack sensed that William was hiding something but decided not to press. "Suicide, huh? Strange for a man with grand dreams." William shrugged. "The pressures can be too much for some. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." As William left, Jack knew he was dealing with something much bigger than a simple suicide case. He decided to follow his next lead, the secretary Emily, who might know more about Jonathan's meetings. Later that day, Jack met Emily at a cafe near the office. She was nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder. "Emily," Jack began, trying to reassure her, "I need you to tell me everything you know about the man who visited Jonathan the night he died." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup. He was tall, with dark hair and piercing eyes. There was something frightening about him. Jonathan really seemed to fear for his life. Jack nodded, encouraging her to continue. "They argued about Project Phoenix," Emily said, her voice trembling. Jonathan was desperate to finalize the deal, but the man said he was playing with fire, that dangerous people were involved. "Did you hear this man's name?" Jack asked. Emily shook her head. "No, but he left a business card." Jonathan was too nervous to take it. Jack knew he needed that card. "Do you still have this card?" Emily hesitated, then pulled a crumpled card from her coat pocket. "Here it is. I picked it up when Jonathan collapsed." Jack took the card, reading the printed name, Victor Blackwood, security consultant. This name, combined with what he knew so far, painted a dark and complex picture. "Thank you, Emily. This helps a lot," said Jack, standing up to leave. "I'm going to find out what really happened to Jonathan." As he left the cafe, Jack felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fit together. But he knew he was only scratching the surface of a deadly secret that could cost him his own life. With Victor Blackwood and William Thompson in his sights, he prepared to face an enemy far more dangerous than he had imagined. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Night had fallen over the city once again, and the persistent rain painted a somber and gloomy picture. Jack Malone was in his office, surrounded by the penetrating aroma of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. The city's lights flickered in the distance, reflected in the wet windows. Jack knew that to unravel the mystery of Jonathan Parker's death, he needed to dig deep into the shadows of the past. Jonathan Parker was a man with many secrets, and Jack knew that his former partner, William Thompson, could provide some answers. With the name Victor Blackwood burning in his mind, Jack felt that each clue was leading him into a darker labyrinth. The next morning, Jack went to William Thompson's elegant office. The reception area was luxurious, with leather furniture and modern art on the walls. He gave his name to the receptionist, who led him to a meeting room where William was waiting. William was seated behind an imposing desk, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Malone, what a pleasure to see you again. What can I do for you?" Jack wasted no time. "I'm here about Jonathan Parker. We need to talk about your past and Project Phoenix." William's smile vanished, replaced by a cold expression. "Jonathan and I were partners, but our relationship soured. He got involved in dangerous things. I warned him to get out, but he wouldn't listen." "What kind of things?" Jack pressed, his eyes fixed on William's. William sighed, as if tired. "Jonathan was messing with powerful and dangerous people. Project Phoenix was an attempt to change the game, but he was playing with fire." "Do these powerful people include Victor Blackwood?" Jack asked, watching William's reaction. William hesitated for a moment, enough for Jack to notice he had touched a nerve. "Blackwood is a key piece in this puzzle. He's more than a security consultant. He's a shadow in the darkness, pulling the strings of puppets like Jonathan." Jack felt a chill. "And you, William? What's your role in all this?" William leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I warned Jonathan. I knew it would end badly. But now I'm out. I want no more involvement in this madness." Jack knew William was hiding something but decided not to push further. "Very well. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Leaving William's office, Jack felt the pieces were beginning to fit together, but he needed more information about Victor Blackwood. He decided to visit an old acquaintance, a longtime informant named Benny, who had a habit of hiding in the shadows of the city's nightclubs. That night, Jack entered one of those clubs, a dark and smoky place where jazz played loudly and secrets flowed as freely as the drinks. He found Benny in a corner, watching the scene with keen eyes. "Benny," Jack greeted, sitting next to him. "I need information about Victor Blackwood." Benny laughed, a rough and humorless sound. "Blackwood? You're playing with fire, Jack. That man is dangerous. I've heard he's involved in all the dirty dealings in the city." "I have no choice," Jack said, lighting a cigarette. "He's connected to Jonathan Parker's death, and I need to know more about him." Benny nodded, taking a sip of his whiskey. "All right, I'll tell you what I know. Blackwood is a ghost. He works in the shadows, manipulating people and situations. His name comes up in connections to trafficking, corruption, and even murder. If Jonathan was involved with him, it explains a lot." "So Jonathan was in deeper trouble than I thought," Jack murmured, reflecting on Benny's words. "And now, I'm in this ghost's crosshairs." Benny looked at Jack with a grave expression. "Be careful, Jack. Blackwood is not someone to mess with. He won't hesitate to eliminate you if he feels you're getting too close." Jack nodded, stubbing out his cigarette. He knew the road ahead was dangerous, but backing down was not an option. With the information about Blackwood, he had a new objective: to track down the ghost and uncover the secrets he was trying to hide. That night, as he left the club and walked through the wet streets, Jack felt the weight of the shadows of the past closing in on him. But he was determined to press on, no matter the cost. The truth about Jonathan Parker's death was out there, in the shadows, and Jack Malone was ready to face them. Chapter 4. The Lady in Red. The rain continued incessantly, turning the city's streets into muddy, reflective rivers. Jack Malone, with the collar of his coat turned up against the cold wind, headed to one of the city's most exclusive clubs, the Red Velvet. This was where Scarlett, the mysterious woman mentioned by Benny, often appeared. Known as the Lady in Red, Scarlett had an intimate connection with Jonathan Parker, and Jack was determined to discover what she knew about Project Phoenix and Victor Blackwood. The Red Velvet was a luxurious club, shrouded in an aura of mystery and decadence. The soft lights and jazz music created a sophisticated atmosphere, but there was something dark behind the glamorous facade. Jack entered, his eyes scanning the room for Scarlett. She was unmistakable, sitting in a dark corner, wrapped in a red dress that seemed to be made of blood and silk. Jack approached cautiously, aware of the eyes that would follow his movements. He knew Scarlett was dangerous, but he also knew she had the answers he was looking for. "Good evening," he said, sitting at her table uninvited. Scarlett looked up, and a slow, enigmatic smile curved her lips. "Mr. Malone, I presume. I've heard about you. I hope it's good things," Jack replied, lighting a cigarette. "I need to talk to you about Jonathan Parker." Scarlett's smile disappeared, replaced by a cautious expression. "Jonathan was a complicated man. What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything," Jack said, exhaling the smoke slowly. "I want to know about Project Phoenix and his relationship with Victor Blackwood." Scarlett picked up her wine glass, swirling the red liquid as if pondering her response. "Jonathan was a visionary, but also a fool. Project Phoenix was his great hope, a way to change the game. He believed he could do it without getting dirty. But he was wrong," Jack observed, his eyes fixed on her. "Completely," she confirmed, her gaze becoming distant. "Victor Blackwood saw him as a tool, a pawn in a much larger game. Jonathan wanted power and money, but Victor wanted absolute control. By the time Jonathan realized this, it was too late." Jack leaned forward, intrigued. "And you, Scarlett? What was your role in all of this?" Scarlett gave a sad smile. "I was the distraction, the temptation. Jonathan trusted me, even loved me. I kept him close, but at the same time, I was watching for Victor." "You betrayed him," Jack said bluntly. "It's not that simple," she replied, the pain evident in her eyes. "I fell in love with Jonathan, and by the time I realized what Victor was planning, it was too late. I tried to warn Jonathan, but he was terrified." "Is that why he was so desperate the night he died?" Jack asked, connecting the dots. Scarlett nodded. "Jonathan knew he was cornered. He planned to flee, but Victor got to him first." Before Jack could ask another question, Scarlett looked over his shoulder, her expression changing to one of pure terror. "He's here," she whispered. Jack turned discreetly and saw Victor Blackwood entering the club, flanked by 2 hulking bodyguards. His presence was intimidating, a tall and imposing man with eyes as cold as ice. Jack knew he had little time. "Scarlett, you need to get out of here. Now," he said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. She hesitated for a moment, then quickly got up and disappeared into the crowd. Jack stayed put, waiting for Victor to notice him. It didn't take long. "Malone," Victor said, approaching with a dangerous smile. "It seems we're destined to meet." "Blackwood," Jack replied, maintaining his composure. "I thought that might be the case." Victor sat down at the table, his eyes boring into Jack's. "You're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, detective. Jonathan Parker made a mistake getting involved in my business. Don't make the same mistake." Jack exhaled the cigarette smoke, not breaking eye contact. "The truth has a funny way of coming out, Blackwood, and I'm very stubborn." Victor laughed softly, a sound devoid of joy. "Stubbornness can be a virtue, but it can also be fatal. Let this go, Malone. I don't want to see you get hurt." Jack knew he was playing a dangerous game. "I'll think about your advice, Blackwood, but for now, I think I'll keep investigating." Victor stood up, his eyes fixed on Jack. "I hope you know what you're doing. You won't get another chance." As Victor walked away, Jack knew the situation had become much more perilous. Scarlett had given him valuable clues, but she had also revealed how deeply she was entangled in the scheme. Now, with Victor aware of his intentions, Jack needed to be more vigilant than ever. Project Phoenix and Jonathan Parker's death were just the tip of the iceberg, and the waters below were filled with betrayal and danger. Chapter 5. The Buried Truth. The night was darker than usual, and the rain had given way to an oppressive silence, as if the city were holding its breath. Jack Malone was back in his office, analyzing all the information he had gathered so far. Scarlett had provided valuable clues about Jonathan Parker and Project Phoenix, but Victor Blackwood's presence at the club that night had increased the pressure. Jack knew he needed more answers, and quickly. He decided to follow the next lead. An abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, mentioned in the documents he had found in Jonathan's office. Jack believed this place could hold the secrets Jonathan had tried to hide. The warehouse was in a deserted industrial area, surrounded by barbed wire fences and scant lighting. Jack parked his car at a safe distance and approached on foot, moving like a shadow through the darkness. The gate was ajar, a not-so-subtle invitation to enter. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of crates and rusty equipment. The sound of rats scurrying in the shadows was the only thing breaking the heavy silence. Jack moved cautiously, his flashlight sweeping the area in search of anything that might reveal more about Project Phoenix. He found a locked room in the back, but nothing a rusty screwdriver couldn't handle. Inside, the scattered papers and folders on a dusty table caught his attention. There were financial documents, contracts, and notes, all related to Project Phoenix. Jack realized Jonathan had been trying to create a secret network of financial control, something that could destabilize many established powers. As Jack examined the papers, a noise behind him alerted him. He turned quickly, but it was too late. A strong blow struck his head, and he fell to the ground, his flashlight rolling away. Darkness enveloped him as he struggled to remain conscious. When Jack regained consciousness, he was tied to a chair, his head throbbing with pain. The harsh light of a spotlight blinded his eyes, but he could make out the silhouettes of several men around him. One stood out, tall, imposing, with a cold gaze. Victor Blackwood. "Malone," Victor said, his voice smooth but filled with menace. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Jack tried to free himself, but the bonds were tight. "The truth is stubborn, Blackwood, and so am I." Victor laughed, a humorless sound. "You and Jonathan were alike, always believing you could change the world. But some things are immutable, Jack. Power and control are among them. You killed Jonathan," Jack stated bluntly, "because he discovered your plans and wanted out. Jonathan became a liability," Victor admitted, emotionless. "He knew too much and was getting careless. Project Phoenix was a threat to the balance I maintain. I couldn't let him continue. So, you brought me here to silence me too?" Jack challenged, feeling the adrenaline surge. Victor stepped closer, his cold eyes fixed on Jack's. "I brought you here to give you a choice, Malone. You can join me, work in the shadows, and enjoy the power I offer. Or you can disappear like Jonathan." Jack knew Victor wasn't bluffing. "I'd rather disappear, but I won't go alone." Before Victor could react, the warehouse door was kicked open, and gunfire echoed through the space. Armed men stormed in, and a familiar figure led the charge. Scarlett. She had managed to gather a small team of mercenaries to rescue Jack. In the ensuing chaos, Jack freed himself from the bonds and grabbed a fallen gun. He and Scarlett fought side by side, taking on Victor's henchmen. The warehouse turned into a battlefield, with gunfire and screams echoing off the metal walls. Finally, Jack found Victor trying to escape through a side exit. He aimed the gun at him, his eyes cold and determined. "It's over, Blackwood." Victor raised his hands, a disdainful smile on his face. "You really think this will end me, Malone? There are things you don't understand." "Maybe," Jack said, not lowering the gun. "But I'll find out." With Scarlett by his side, Jack escorted Victor outside, where the police, finally alerted by the commotion, were waiting. Victor was handcuffed and taken away, his cold gaze still fixed on Jack. As the night ended and dawn began to break, Jack and Scarlett stood side by side, watching the scene. "You saved my life," Jack said, looking at her with gratitude. Scarlett smiled slightly, her face marked by the battle. "We owe it to Jonathan. He wanted the truth, and now we have a chance to reveal it." Jack knew the fight was far from over, but with Victor in custody and Scarlett by his side, he felt they were one step closer to unearthing all the buried secrets and exposing the truth behind Project Phoenix. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Victor Blackwood's arrest seemed to cast a brief ray of hope over the city. However, Jack Malone knew this victory was only temporary. Victor's power extended far beyond what they had seen so far, and Jack was aware that the real fight was still to come. That night, as Jack and Scarlett rested in a hidden bar on the outskirts of the city, they discussed their next steps. Scarlett, with a distant look, held a glass of whiskey in her hands as she reflected on recent events. "Jack, Victor is not the end of this," she said, her voice low and worried. "He's just a piece in a much bigger game. We need to find out who the other players are." Jack nodded, lighting a cigarette. "You're right. And for that, we need to uncover more about Project Phoenix. There's something in this project we're missing, something Jonathan knew that made him a target." Suddenly, the sound of a phone broke the silence. Jack answered quickly, hoping it was a lead or an update on the case. "Malone, it's Benny," said the rough voice on the other end of the line. "I found something you'll want to see. Meet me at the warehouse on Pier 17, but come alone. I can't trust anyone else." Jack hung up the phone and looked at Scarlett. "Benny has something. I'm going to meet him." "I'm coming with you," Scarlett said firmly. "He said to come alone," Jack replied, concerned. "Stay here and cover my back. If something goes wrong, I want you in a safe position." Scarlett hesitated but eventually agreed. "All right, but be careful, Jack. I don't trust Benny." Jack left the bar and drove to Pier 17. The warehouse was dark and silent, with only the moonlight illuminating the shadows. He entered cautiously, his hand close to his revolver, ready for anything. Inside the warehouse, Benny was waiting, nervous and restless. "Malone, glad you came. I found something big about Project Phoenix. But we need to be quick. They're after me." Jack approached, watching the man in front of him closely. "What did you find, Benny?" Benny handed over an envelope full of documents. "These papers detail the true purpose of Project Phoenix. It wasn't just a financial network. Jonathan was trying to expose a larger conspiracy involving high-ranking figures in politics and the police. Victor was just the visible face of it." Jack began to flip through the documents, absorbing the information. "This is huge, Benny. With this, we can bring down a lot of powerful people." Before Benny could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Jack instinctively drew his gun, but it was too late. A group of armed men appeared, led by none other than William Thompson. "Ah, Jack, I knew you couldn't resist," William said with a cruel smile. "Benny here was a useful pawn, but now it's time to end this game." Jack kept his gun steady, his eyes never leaving William's. "You've been involved from the beginning, haven't you? You and Victor working together." "Yes," William admitted arrogantly. "Jonathan was about to destroy everything we built. We couldn't let that happen." Jack knew he was at a disadvantage, but he couldn't back down now. "You can kill me, William, but these documents will expose the truth, and there are more people than you think fighting for justice." William laughed, but the sound was interrupted by a gunshot that echoed through the warehouse. Benny fell, shot by one of William's men. Jack reacted instantly, firing back at the attackers while seeking cover. The warehouse turned into a battlefield, with bullets flying and the echoes of screams and shots filling the air. In the chaos, Jack saw an opportunity. He lunged at William, knocking him to the ground. The fight was fierce, with punches and kicks exchanged in a desperate struggle. Finally, Jack managed to pin William down, pointing his gun at him. "This is the end of the line, William," Jack said, breathless. "You think this ends me?" William replied disdainfully. "There's more than you can imagine." Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Scarlett had alerted the police, and they arrived in time to arrest William's thugs. William was led away in handcuffs, still casting hateful glances at Jack. As the police secured the scene, Jack approached Benny, who was gravely wounded. "Benny," Jack said, holding his friend's hand. "Hang on. Help is on the way." Benny smiled weakly. "Get those bastards, Jack. Make it count." Jack nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. He knew the fight was far from over, but with the documents in hand and Scarlett by his side, he was more determined than ever to expose the truth and dismantle the conspiracy behind Project Phoenix. Chapter 7. The Turnaround. The city was enveloped in an aura of tension. With William Thompson in custody and Benny fighting for his life in the hospital, Jack Malone knew that time was against him. Victor Blackwood was still out of reach, and the documents Jack had obtained were just the tip of the iceberg. He needed to act quickly and intelligently. That night, Jack and Scarlett were in Jack's small apartment, surrounded by the documents Benny had delivered. The dim light from the lamp on the table cast dancing shadows as they examined each detail, trying to piece together the puzzle. These documents mentioned several offshore accounts and transactions, Scarlett said, pointing to a page. It looks like Jonathan was tracking the money back to some bigwigs in politics and the police. Jack frowned, thinking aloud. Victor and William weren't working alone. They had support from powerful people. We need concrete proof to bring them down. Scarlett looked at Jack, her expression determined. We need a plan. We can't just hand this over to the police. The corruption runs too deep. We need to expose everything publicly. Jack agreed. We need to lure Victor and the others into a trap. Make them show their true colors and record everything. And for that, we need help. That night, Jack made some calls, summoning old allies and trusted friends. He knew this operation had to be meticulously planned. The first person he contacted was a trusted investigative reporter, Mike Henderson, someone he knew couldn't be bought. The next day, Jack and Scarlett met Mike at a discreet cafe in the city center. Jack handed Mike a copy of the documents. Mike, we need you, said Jack. These documents show a network of corruption involving Victor Blackwood and other bigwigs. We need to expose this publicly, but we can't trust the police. Mike looked through the papers, his expression turning serious. This is explosive, Jack. If we can get visual evidence and recordings, we can bring them down. Jack nodded. We need to lure Victor into a meeting, make him feel secure enough to talk freely. And we need to record everything. Scarlett, Jack, and Mike spent hours discussing the details of the plan. They decided to use an abandoned warehouse as the setting, an isolated and discreet location. Mike would use hidden cameras to capture everything. The key was to make Victor believe that Jack was willing to negotiate. To this end, Scarlett contacted one of Victor's former henchmen, someone she knew was dissatisfied and looking for a way out. The man, a brute named Tony, agreed to help in exchange for protection and a way out of the city. On the appointed night, Jack was at the warehouse, nervous but determined. He had a microphone hidden in his lapel and a small camera installed on the table in front of him. Mike and his team were positioned around the area, ready to record everything. Victor arrived, accompanied by two henchmen. He looked confident, a cold smile on his lips. Malone, it's good to see you finally made a sensible decision. Jack remained calm. I have enough evidence to bring you and all your cronies down, Blackwood. But I'm willing to negotiate. Victor raised an eyebrow, interested. And what do you want in return? I want out of this clean, Jack said, looking directly at Victor. You give me a good sum of money and a ticket out of the country, and I hand over all the documents I have. Victor laughed, a humorless sound. You really think you can blackmail me, Malone? You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, Jack responded firmly. And I know you don't have a choice. These documents are explosive, and if anything happens to me, they will be released immediately. Victor was silent for a moment, pondering. Then, he signaled to one of his henchmen, who handed Jack a briefcase. Here's your money. But remember, Malone, there's no place in the world where you can hide from me. Jack opened the briefcase, checking the money. He knew the trap was about to close. Very well. Here are the documents. He handed a folder to Victor, who began to flip through it. At that moment, Jack made a discreet signal to the hidden camera. Mike and his team were recording everything. Suddenly, the silence was broken by sirens and flashing lights. The police, alerted by Mike, stormed the warehouse, arresting Victor and his henchmen. Jack and Scarlett were immediately protected by Mike's team. Victor, handcuffed and furious, glared at Jack. "You'll pay for this, Malone." Jack gave a cold smile. "Not this time, Blackwood. The truth has finally come to light." As Victor was taken away by the police, Jack felt a huge weight lifting off his shoulders. The battle was far from over, but they had taken a big step towards justice. Scarlett approached, a relieved smile on her face. "We did it, Jack," she said, holding his hand. "Yes, we did," he replied, feeling the gravity of the moment. "But we still have a long way to go." As night turned to day, Jack knew the fight against corruption and injustice continued. But with Scarlett by his side and allies like Mike, he was more determined than ever to press on. The truth had been exposed, and now they needed to ensure that the shadows could never hide their secrets again. Chapter 8. The conclusion. The city slowly awakened, shrouded in a morning fog that promised to dissipate as the sun rose. Jack Malone watched the scene from atop a building, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. The truth about Project Phoenix had been revealed, but the price paid was high. He knew the danger was not yet entirely averted. That day, Jack, Scarlett, and Mike gathered at a discreet cafe in the city center. The atmosphere was charged with tension but also determination. The evidence gathered by Jack and Scarlett, along with the recordings made by Mike, had caused a political earthquake. Several powerful figures were under investigation, and the corruption network was beginning to unravel. "Good job, everyone," said Mike, taking a sip of coffee. "But we know this isn't over yet. Victor Blackwood may be in jail, but his tentacles are still out there." Scarlett nodded. "We need to ensure that everyone involved is exposed. Every single one of them." Jack looked at his companions, feeling the gravity of the situation. "We have to be meticulous. We can't let any detail slip. And we need to ensure our safety." As they discussed their next steps, Jack received a call from an unknown number. He answered, already expecting more trouble. "Malone," said a familiar, cold, and calculating voice. "Do you really think you've won?" Jack recognized the voice immediately. It was William Thompson, who, despite being in prison, still had ways to communicate. "William, I hoped I wouldn't hear from you again." William laughed, a joyless sound. "Oh, Jack, you're naive. Do you think prison can stop me? You may have won the battle, but the war is far from over." "Then come," said Jack firmly. "I'm waiting." The call ended abruptly, and Jack knew it was a sign that something big was about to happen. He shared the information with Scarlett and Mike, who agreed to bolster their security measures. That night, Jack and Scarlett prepared for the final battle. They knew William and his cronies would do anything to silence them. They holed up in an abandoned warehouse, turning it into an improvised fortress, full of hidden cameras and defense points. Around midnight, William's henchmen began to arrive. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the warehouse, and Jack and Scarlett were ready. They had the advantage of the terrain and surprise on their side. The first wave of attackers was met with a hail of bullets. Jack and Scarlett moved like shadows, utilizing every available cover. The cameras captured every movement, every face, ensuring nothing went unnoticed. In the midst of the chaos, Jack saw William entering the warehouse. He was armed and with a furious expression on his face. Jack knew this was the decisive moment. "Malone!" William shouted, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Let's end this once and for all." Jack emerged from the shadows, pointing his gun at William. "It's time to pay for your crimes, William." William laughed, raising his gun. "You really think you can defeat me, Jack?" Before William could shoot, Scarlett appeared behind him, disarming him with a precise blow. Jack seized the opportunity and immobilized him, cuffing his wrists. "It's over, William," said Jack, his voice firm. "You can't run anymore." As the police arrived to arrest William's henchmen and take him back to prison, Jack felt immense relief. The battle had been tough, but they had won. Later that same night, Jack and Scarlett sat on the roof of the warehouse, watching the city lights. The sense of triumph was palpable, But there was also a silent understanding that the fight for justice never truly ended. "We did it," said Scarlet, smiling at Jack. "Yes, we did," Jack replied, holding her hand. "But we still have a long way to go. There will always be shadows to face." Scarlet nodded, knowing Jack was right. "But at least we know we can make a difference." As the night progressed and the city continued its endless journey, Jack and Scarlet knew they were ready for whatever came next. United in their quest for truth and justice, they would face any challenge that arose, knowing that together, they could illuminate even the darkest shadows. And so, under the starry sky and the distant glow of the city lights, Jack Malone and Scarlet prepared for new battles, knowing that the truth would always prevail, even in the darkest of times.